Chapter 1. From the plain, the village looked like a ripple of green smeared across a patch of earth in the middle of nowhere. Surveyor's markers showed the little blips that defined its edges. I glanced down, already daydreaming about what awaited on the ground. Walking through the empty airport, I considered the advice the locals at the guesthouse had given me. I hesitated at the thought of being the only foreigner in the village that swallowed valleys and mountains with no cell phone service or internet. I wondered how long it would take the villagers to grow curious about my arrival. But I saw none in sight as I trudged along the muddy road, my backpack slung heavily over my shoulders. As I neared the village, perched precariously atop a cliff overlooking the sea, I took in the crude wooden huts packed tightly together like soldiers at attention. Smoke curled from the chimneys, and there was a palpable sense of unease that hung heavy in the air. As I walked past the huts, I couldn't shake the feeling that the villagers were watching me with hungry eyes. My curiosity piqued. I decided to approach the largest hut, hoping to find someone who might speak English. The door creaked open, and a gaunt woman with blood-stained teeth and dark eyes peered at me with suspicion. ¿Dónde es mi alojamiento? I asked hesitantly, unsure if I had made a mistake in coming here. The woman's eyes narrowed, and she hesitated before gesturing towards a small hut at the edge of the village. "That's the hut they've given you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You'll have to make do. We don't get many visitors." I thanked her, though it felt more like an apology, and trudged over to the hut, my excitement extinguished like a candle in the wind. I entered the hut to find a single bed with a bear skin barely covering it, a jug of water on the table, and a candlestick with a flickering flame. The walls were adorned with intricate tapestries, but they did little to warm the chill that had seeped into my bones. Outside, the villagers returned to their activities, moving with a purpose that left me feeling like an unwelcome intruder. I took a deep breath, trying to shake off my apprehension. I set my bag down and surveyed the hut. It was sparse, but it would serve as a place to rest my head for the night. I walked back outside, determined to explore the village and possibly strike up a conversation with someone. I saw children playing with sticks and stones, women milking cows, and men repairing fishing nets. But whenever they caught sight of me, they immediately looked away and went back to their work. The only person who didn't seem to be avoiding me was an old man sitting on a stool near a fire. I approached him, and as I got closer, I could make out the lines on his face etched with years of hardship and toil. "Hello," I greeted him, hoping my friendly demeanor would break the ice. "I'm Thomas, a traveler passing through. Is there anyone here who might speak English?" The old man looked up at me with deep-set eyes, then looked around to see if anyone was listening. "You'd best be careful who you ask that question to around here," he said cryptically, his voice low and raspy. Chapter 2. I stepped out of my hut, eager to explore the village and get to know its inhabitants. A little girl, no more than 7 years old, with dirt smeared on her face and a mischievous twinkle in her eye, appeared at my side. "You're new here," she said, her voice low and raspy like an old woman's. I nodded, and she looked at me with curiosity. "You don't look like them." She pointed towards the other villagers who moved around, surveying their surroundings. They all follow a carnivore diet. That's why we don't eat with them. She said it so matter-of-factly, as if it was the most natural thing in the world. Really? I asked, trying to conceal my shock. Then, what do you eat? Anything we can find in the woods. She looked up at me, her dark eyes unblinking. But sometimes, we get tired of eating meat all the time. So, we hunt for vegetables or fruits. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. It was as if I had stepped into another world, one where the rules of civilization were different. How do you hunt for vegetables or fruits? I asked, trying to hide my surprise. The forest is miles away. The little girl smiled enigmatically, like she was about to reveal a great secret. We have our ways, she said cryptically. I studied the children as they ran through the village, their laughter filling the air. It seemed they were the only ones who didn't fear me, who weren't wary of the outsider who had come to invade their home. I couldn't help but wonder what lay behind their eyes. What kind of world had they grown up in that allowed them to roam freely through the village, yet kept the rest of the villagers at arm's length? As I watched them play, I noticed a group of adults gathered around a fire, eyes locked on me like I was their prey. My heart raced. The air felt thick and heavy, like a storm was brewing. I swallowed hard and turned to leave, but a voice stopped me in my tracks. "You're new here," a man said, his voice gruff and low, like the wind howling through the trees. I turned to face him and nodded slowly. Yes, I just arrived. The man stepped forward, his dark eyes scrutinizing me from head to toe. "What brings you here? We don't get many visitors in these parts." I hesitated, unsure of how to answer. "Just passing through," I said finally. I thought it would be interesting to explore a remote village like this. The man frowned, cocking his head to the side. "There's nothing here worth seeing," he muttered under his breath. I couldn't help but feel a twinge of defensiveness. "Well, that's for you to decide," I shot back. My words seemed to rile him up. "You think you know everything, don't you?" he growled. "But you know nothing of this place. You don't know our ways, our customs, and you never will." He stepped closer to me, a warning in his eyes. I swallowed hard, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm just curious, that's all. I don't mean any harm." He snorted but seemed to relax a little. "You'd do well to heed my advice. Outsiders aren't welcome here. You wouldn't want to attract unwanted attention." His warning sent a shiver down my spine, but I nodded. "I understand." Chapter 3. The sun dipped low, casting an eerie glow over the village perched on its rocky bluff. I had spent days exploring the settlement, my curiosity piqued by the strange occurrences. The villagers' furtive glances towards the dense forest bordering their homes. I managed to befriend a few locals, but their conversations were always cut short by the arrival of a tall, imposing figure known only as the Hunter. The man's scarred face and brooding demeanor sent shivers down my spine, and the villagers seemed to cower in his presence. One evening, as I sat by the communal fire, the hunter approached me. "You're new here," he growled, his voice like thunder. "What brings you to our little slice of hell?" I met his gaze steadily. "I'm looking for answers," the hunter. "Answers about the people who've gone missing." The hunter's eyes narrowed, and he leaned in closer. "You're not the first to ask such questions, traveler, but none who've sought the truth have ever left these shores." He paused, then added ominously, "Are you willing to risk your life to discover the truth?" I hesitated for a moment, weighing the consequences of my actions, but I knew that I couldn't go back without finding out what had happened to the missing persons. "Yes, I am," I said finally. "Good." The hunter nodded, a grim smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Then, follow me." He led me deep into the forest, the darkness closing in around us like a suffocating shroud. My heart raced with fear, but curiosity kept me going. We tread silently. The only sounds were the rustling of leaves and the distant crash of waves. Finally, we reached a small clearing, and I could see what looked like a pile of bones and tattered clothing stacked haphazardly. I stared at it, a wave of nausea washing over me. "This is what happens to those who dare to venture into the forest," the hunter said quietly, his voice full of warning. I took a deep breath and looked up at him. "Who or what is doing this?" I asked. I could hardly believe what I was seeing. The pile of bones and tattered clothes in front of me told a horrifying story, and I wanted to know who or what was behind it. The hunter hesitated, eyeing me warily. "I can only tell you that it is an ancient evil, something that has haunted this land for centuries, and now it seems to be growing hungrier." I frowned. "Hungrier for what?" "For human flesh," he said solemnly. "But not just any flesh." Chapter 4. The following morning, I woke up early, ready to explore the village in daylight. I stepped out of my hut, and a cool mist greeted my face, wrapping my hair and beard in wet tendrils. I took a deep breath, inhaling the crisp sea air, and walked towards the village center. As I walked, I heard rustling behind a hut. I turned to look, and a man emerged from behind it. He had tan skin, messy hair, and deep blue eyes that bore into my soul. I didn't recognize him. He looked like a total refugee. He looked like he belonged in a Viking movie, and I couldn't help but feel intimidated. "Who are you?" I asked, narrowing my eyes. "Just a fellow traveler," he replied, his voice deep and gravelly. "Passing through this village on my way to the city." He stretched out his hand and I shook it, feeling the roughness of his calloused palms. I'm Thomas, I said, introducing myself. Magnus, he replied, his lips curling into a smile. Magnus Nordheim, from Norway? What brings you to this out-of-the-way village? My heart raced as I felt my first connection with another human since arriving in this remote place. I'm looking for answers, I admitted, feeling the weight of my questions hanging heavily in the air. I heard about the disappearances around here, and I wanted to see for myself what was going on. Magnus raised an eyebrow and tilted his head to the side, seemingly sizing me up. Disappearances, you say? He repeated. Yes, that's right, I replied. Magnus leaned against a nearby hut, studying me intently. After a long moment, he spoke again. I was here 2 weeks ago, and I heard the same stories you did. People keep disappearing, and nobody seems to know why. Have you noticed anything unusual? I pressed, desperate for any information that might shed some light on the mysteries surrounding the village. I didn't see anything myself, but others have reported odd occurrences. A woman claimed to have seen a creature in the woods, and another said there was a strange noise coming from the cliffs at night. Magnus sighed, leaning against the wall of the hut. Something doesn't seem right. I nodded solemnly, my thoughts racing. Something was definitely wrong in this village, and I was determined to find out what was happening. Magnus, do you mind if I ask you a question? I inquired, turning to the Norwegian traveler. He cocked his head and shrugged his shoulders non-committally. Sure, go ahead. I've got nothing to hide. I took a breath, preparing myself for the disbelief and dismissal that usually followed my curiosity. Have you ever heard of people disappearing in other villages? Places with similar geographical features to this one. It's just, I keep hearing tales of vanished travelers, and something about it doesn't sit right with me. Magnus frowned thoughtfully and rubbed his jaw. Well, I have heard some whispers of disappearances over the years from fellow travelers in isolated communities. But it's hard to know for sure without more information, Magnus admitted, looking uncomfortable. You see, there are a lot of myths and legends surrounding these areas. Some say the village is cursed by witchcraft, or that it's guarded by sinister beings lurking in the woods. His words sent chills down my spine. Guardians? I asked, trying to keep the tone casual. Do you really think it's true? Magnus shrugged nonchalantly. I don't believe in witchcraft or guardians, but I won't lie to you, Thomas. I've seen things here that have left me questioning what's real and what isn't. He paused, taking a deep breath before continuing. Some people say they've heard strange noises at night. Others claim to have seen shadowy figures in the woods moving near the village. I haven't witnessed anything myself, but the stories have been circulating for weeks. I listened intently as Magnus spoke, my curiosity piqued. What kind of shadowy figures? I asked, unable to hide the eagerness in my voice. Did they mention anything about their appearance? Magnus shook his head, his eyes clouded with uncertainty. No, they didn't describe them well enough. They just mentioned that they looked strange and were quick, disappearing before they could get a better look. He paused for a moment, looking thoughtful. One thing's for sure, though. They were not human. I felt a shiver run down my spine at his words. Strange? In what way? Magnus hesitated for a moment, as if searching for the right words. As I said, nobody knows exactly what they look like, but in most stories, they describe them as emaciated, with long limbs and glowing red eyes. They move unusually fast and sometimes seem to float. I frowned as I listened to him. I had encountered many strange things throughout my travels, but this one was starting to sound like the fabrications of overactive imaginations. I appreciate the information, I said to Magnus, hoping he would continue to share more. I just can't help but wonder if there isn't a logical explanation for all of this, I murmured, more to myself than him. There always seems to be one somewhere, but I fear that the truth may lie beyond the bounds of our understanding. We continued our discussion, spending the remainder of the morning in quiet conversation as we explored the village. By noon, we found ourselves on the outskirts of town, near the dense woodland forest that bordered the village. This is where the disappearances most frequently occur, Magnus offered, as he gazed into the depths of the forest with an uneasy expression on his face. Chapter 5. The sun dipped low, casting an eerie glow over the village perched on its rocky bluff. I had spent days exploring the settlement, my curiosity piqued by the strange occurrences and the village's furtive glances towards the dense forest bordering their homes. I'd managed to befriend a few locals, but their conversations were always cut short by the arrival of a tall, imposing figure known only as the Hunter. The man's scarred face and brooding demeanor sent shivers down my spine, and the villagers seemed to cower in his presence. One evening, as I sat by the communal fire, the Hunter approached me. "You're new here," he growled, his voice like thunder. "What brings you to our little slice of hell?" I met his gaze steadily. "I'm looking for answers," the Hunter. "Answers about the people who've gone missing." The Hunter's eyes narrowed and he leaned in closer. "You're not the first to ask such questions, traveler, but none who've sought the truth have ever left these shores." He paused, then added ominously, "Are you willing to risk your life to discover the truth?" I swallowed hard, thinking of the people who had gone missing, and my own insatiable curiosity. "Yes, I am." The Hunter nodded, satisfied by my answer. He led me deeper into the forest, the trees growing denser and more menacing. Suddenly, he stopped and held up a hand. "Listen." I strained my ears, but all I could hear was the sound of my own breathing and the distant crashing waves. "What am I listening for?" I whispered, my throat tight with anticipation. The Hunter's eyes glinted in the dim light as he leaned in closer. "You'll know when you hear it," he said cryptically. We stood there, waiting in the silence, until suddenly I heard it. A faint rustling sound, like the leaves of a tree being disturbed by a soft breeze, but there was no wind to be felt. I turned to the Hunter, my eyes wide with wonder and fear. "What was that?" He smiled cryptically. "That, my dear traveler, is the sound of our guardians, the entities that protect this village." I echoed, trying to process the information. "What do you mean? Are they good or evil?" The Hunter shrugged. "It depends on how you view them. They ensure the safety of our village by patrolling the forest and making sure no outsiders harm our way of life. Unfortunately, sometimes the Guardians mistake travelers like you for threats and attack." I I went silent, absorbing the hunter's words. I had an uneasy feeling in the pit of my stomach. Suddenly, I heard a rustling in the bushes behind me and spun around quickly. A figure emerged from the cover of the trees, draped in animal furs. Its face was obscured by a shroud, and its eyes glowed like molten gold in the darkness. I stood frozen, my heart pounding, as the guardian closed the distance between us. It towered over me, its emaciated form radiating a palpable aura of menace. "Wait!" I shout, raising my hands in surrender. I turn to the hunter, who hasn't moved an inch. "What are you doing? Why didn't you tell me about this thing? I thought you were taking me to find answers about the disappearances." The hunter smiles grimly. "It seems like you're getting your answers now, aren't you?" He turns and disappears into the trees, leaving me facing the guardian alone. Chapter 6. The hunter's words echoed in my mind as I stared into the crackling fire. None who've sought the truth have ever left these shores. A chill ran down my spine, but my resolve only strengthened. I was determined to uncover the truth behind the disappearances, no matter the cost. The next day, I decided to set a trap for the hunter. If he was indeed responsible for the vanishings, I needed proof. I borrowed a length of sturdy rope from one of the villagers and headed into the forest, following the path the hunter usually took when he left the village. I chose a spot near a narrow ravine where the path widened slightly. There, I tied one end of the rope securely around a sturdy tree and stretched the other across the path, camouflaging it with leaves and branches. Satisfied with my makeshift snare, I hid behind the nearby bush and waited. Hours passed, and the forest grew quiet as dusk fell. Just as I began to doubt my plan, I heard the faint crunch of leaves underfoot. My heart pounded in my chest as I peered through the darkness, making out the silhouette of a tall figure approaching. The hunter. He walked with a purposeful stride, his boots crunching the dry leaves underfoot. The trees creaked ominously in the wind, casting eerie shadows on the path ahead. My heart raced as I held my breath, making sure not to rustle the bushes. I sensed him getting closer and closer. It was now or never. With a swift yank, I released the camouflaged rope, meant to ensnare the mysterious figure. The sound of the snap echoed through the forest, and the tree branches swayed wildly. The hunter's gaze snapped towards the source, and his body stiffened. He quickly scanned the surrounding area, his eyes locking onto my hiding spot behind the bush. I held my breath, hoping he couldn't see me. But it was too late. He lunged towards me like a wild animal, his movements sharp and precise. I scrambled to my feet, adrenaline coursing through my veins. I took off running, but I could feel his presence closing in behind me. The forest was dense and unfamiliar, and I could easily lose my way. My heart pounded as I zigzagged through the trees, gasping for breath. Suddenly, I felt a strong arm wrap around my waist, hauling me back against a muscular chest. I struggled against the hunter's grip, but he was too strong. "Let me go," I shouted, but my words were lost in the dense foliage. "That was reckless," he growled, his voice low and menacing. "You're lucky I didn't kill you." Didn't you? I panted, still struggling against his grip. Because I'm not the one you need to be worried about, he replied, releasing me suddenly. I stumbled forward, my heart racing, and turned to face him. What do you mean? He swept a hand towards the dense forest surrounding us. All of this, the village, the disappearances, the guardians, they're all connected, he said cryptically. And they've been watching you ever since you arrived? I gulped as his words sank in. You've got to get out of here before it's too late, he urged, but I only stared at him blankly, unable to process the information. The villagers are their pawns. They lure unsuspecting travelers like you to this remote village, and the guardians do their work. He paused, and I suddenly felt torn between my desire for answers and the need to escape. You should go while you can, he added softly. I shook my head, my determination unwavering. No, I can't leave without finding out the truth. You said it yourself. I'm already in danger. Might as well get to the bottom of this mystery. The hunter hesitated for a moment before nodding slowly. Fine. Meet me at the village center when the sun sets. I'll tell you what I know. With that, he disappeared into the shadows of the forest. As I made my way back to the village, I was overwhelmed by a sense of unease. Chapter 7. My heart raced as the hunter stepped onto the path, mere inches from my hidden snare. I held my breath, fingers tightening around the loose end of the rope. Now or never. With a swift tug, I pulled the rope taut, sending the hunter crashing to the ground. Before he could react, I leaped from my hiding spot and pinned him down, using the rope to bind his wrists and ankles. Who are you? He growled, struggling against his restraints. Why are you doing this? I'm the one who wants answers, I retorted, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through me. Answers about the people who've gone missing in this village. The hunter's expression darkened and he stopped struggling. You shouldn't have come here, traveler. Some things are better left unknown. Not good enough, I snapped. I need to know the truth. All of it. He glared at me, defiance burning in his eyes, but I could see the resignation there too. He knew he was beaten. Very well, he finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. But not here. Take me back to your camp. And I'll tell you everything. And when dawn breaks, we'll strike together to end this nightmare once and for all. My heart raced with anticipation as I led the hunter through the dense woodland. We moved with purpose and stealth, the gravity of our situation weighing heavily on us both. Finally, we arrived at my campsite, hidden amongst the trees, and I squatted down to free the hunter from his bonds. He stood warily, eyeing me cautiously as I spoke. Remember, we're in this together. If something goes wrong, we'll face it as partners, I reassured him, untying the knots that held him captive. The hunter nodded, his expression wary but thankful. We sat around the campfire, staring intently into the flames as I waited for the hunter to begin his story. The wind howled through the trees, and the darkness of the forest seemed to close in around us. We have lived in fear of this creature for centuries, the hunter revealed, his voice barely above a whisper. It commands our respect and nourishment. We give it what it wants, and in return, it spares us," the hunter continued, his voice barely above a whisper. The fire crackled and popped as if to punctuate the eeriness of the tale. "We appease it by sacrificing outsiders to its dark hunger." My mind raced, struggling to reconcile the duality of the people I had come to know and trust in this remote village. "So you imprison innocent travelers here, then lead them to their doom?" I asked, disbelief tinging my voice. The hunter nodded, the flickering light of the campfire shining in his hollow gaze. "It is the way things have always been," he said softly. A heavy silence fell between us as I tried to absorb this revelation. "That's monstrous," I finally said, anger surging within me. The hunter shook his head. "No, you do not understand. If we do not sacrifice them, the creature takes a villager in its stead. It's a matter of survival." I looked deeply into the fire, chewing over his words. "How do you know it's not just a myth or legend, though, created to manipulate the villagers into doing something they might not otherwise consider? I have seen the creature myself. It is most definitely real," I asked, shuddering from the thought of such a being actually existing among us. "How did you end up in this situation, Magnus, hunting and capturing outsiders for a mythical monster?" He sighed heavily. "Like many, my family was entrapped by its terror for generations, forced to continue the dark tradition. But I sought to break the cycle," the hunter continued, staring intently into the fire. "I wanted to ensure that I could live a normal life, free from fear and oppression." "Then why did you continue to hunt outsiders?" I questioned, struggling to understand the contradiction in his words. "Even when I tried to leave and start a new life, the village demanded a sacrifice. I realized that I could not escape my past by simply abandoning it," he confessed, dropping his gaze to the ground. Chapter 8. Back at my camp, I forced the hunter to sit on a log while I prepared a fire. The sun had set, casting an eerie glow over the forest, and I wanted some light to see his face as he spoke. As I struck a match, I asked, "So, what's your story? Why are you so involved in these disappearances?" The hunter watched me silently, his expression unreadable. I could feel the weight of his gaze, but I refused to look away. Finally, he spoke. "You're right," he admitted, his voice heavy with resignation. "I am involved, but not in the way you think." I raised an eyebrow, waiting for him to continue. It started years ago," he began, staring into the growing flames. "This village was plagued by a terrible curse. A monstrous creature roamed the woods, preying on the villagers. No one was safe." He paused, lost in thought. "My ancestors were hunters, tasked with protecting the village from this evil. We passed down our knowledge, our weapons, and our duty from generation to generation. And when the creature resurfaced, it fell to me to stop it." I listened in shock as he continued. His voice remained distant, as if recounting a long-forgotten story, rather than reliving the events of his past. "The first time I encountered the creature, I barely survived. It hunted me for days, and each time it nearly claimed my life. By the time it finally caught up with me, I was near death. Its gaze locked onto mine as it bore its grotesque fangs, a wicked glint in its eyes. At the final moment, when I saw the end was inevitable, a miraculous change came over it. Its body shuddered, the malice in its gaze suddenly softening. Blood streamed from its fangs, and it weakened. As if frightened, it turned and limped away. That incident served as a turning point in our lives, Rurik said. The creature did not attack the village again for a long time, but I could feel its growing unease, its desire to hunt, feed, and wreak vengeance. We avoided each other after that day, but I knew the end game was near. It would come back to finish me off or claim a new victim. Acting on instinct, I used the knowledge passed down from my forefathers to prepare a trap, the same trap I would have fallen into had you not stopped me in the forest. And when the beast finally returned, I ensnared it and bound its limbs. Or so I thought. But the creature was far too powerful for me to contain, even with all the training I'd received. In the end, it freed itself and was about to end my life when you intervened. That's when I realized that my vendetta against the creature had been just as misguided as the villagers' fear. It doesn't hunt humans because it enjoys violence. It does so out of necessity. We humans have encroached upon its territory, forced it to feed on us, and turned it into an evil symbol. As I spoke, I felt the heavy weight of guilt lift from my shoulders. I never suspected that this elusive creature had been driven to this level of desperation out of the simple need to survive. The hunter paused and looked at me. I could tell his confession had taken a lot out of him. I was still grappling with the shock of the revelations, but realized that action needed to be taken. So you're saying we have to take care of this creature for once and for all, get it out of our lives so no more innocents need to die? I asked, to confirm our understanding. He nodded. We must put an end to the suffering it has endured. But we cannot simply destroy it. We are guests on its land, after all. Chapter 9. The hunter continued, his voice barely above a whisper. The creature is ancient, born of dark magic, and fed by the blood of the innocent. It cannot be killed, only contained. And the only way to do that is to offer it a sacrifice. I stared at him, horrified. You mean you've been feeding it people? He nodded grimly. Strangers, travelers like yourself, those who wander into the forest and never return. It's the only way to keep the village safe. But why not just leave? I demanded. Find a new place to live, away from this monster. Because this is our home, he snapped, his eyes flashing with anger. Our ancestors built this village, and we won't abandon it, not while there's still hope. I shook my head, disgust and pity warring within me. That's not hope. That's madness. You can't keep living like this, sacrificing people to some beast. We have no choice, he insisted. Not unless someone finds a way to truly destroy it. An idea began to form in my mind. Dangerous and reckless, but perhaps the only way to save these people. I glanced over at the hunter, watching him closely. If you truly believe the creature can't be killed, then perhaps we need a different approach. The hunter raised an eyebrow, studying me with unreadable eyes. You're thinking we should try to capture the creature instead, aren't you? Yes. If we can find a way to corral it and contain it somehow, we can use that information to drive a wedge between this creature and the villagers. The hunter only stared at me, his expression unreadable. After a long moment, he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. There's a cavern on the other side of the mountain. It's used for the annual sacrifice. If you can find a way to trap the creature there, we may have a chance. My heart raced. Was this really possible? Could we contain the creature and save the villagers? I had to try. But we need to act quickly, the hunter warned. Once the final sacrifice is made, the creature will be at its strongest. We must use that time to our advantage. The fire had burned low, casting flickering shadows across the hunter's taut features. I tossed a few more branches onto the flames, stoking the embers until the fire roared to life again. The hunter's words sent a chill down my spine. What happens if we don't make the final offering? I croaked, my dry throat rasping with fear. If we fail, we face the consequences, the hunter said, his voice cold and calculating. I knew what he meant. If we did not capture the creature in time, it would make its final offering and wreak havoc on the village. I couldn't bear the thought of more innocent lives being taken. Fine, I said determinedly. Where do we start? The hunter looked me square in the eye, his gaze intense. We'll need to gather resources. Food, tools, and anything else we might need to trap the creature in that cavern. I nodded, my brain whirling with ideas. This was going to be a difficult task, but if we could successfully capture the creature, we might just be able to save the villagers. And we'll need a way to immobilize it once we have it in the cavern. I have an idea for that, but we'll need more time to put it into action. The hunter smiled, a rare sight, but one that filled me with a glimmer of hope. Good. Let's start early tomorrow. The harder we work, the sooner we can put an end to this nightmare. As the night wore on, we discussed our plans in hushed whispers. We decided to split up, each of us taking a different route through the forest, setting traps along the way to minimize the chances of the hunter escaping. I nodded, determination washing over me. I wouldn't rest until this nightmare ended, no matter the odds. At first light, we set out into the wilderness, each of us armed and ready. Chapter 10. The hunter looked at me, surprise etched on his face. You're serious? You really want to do this? I nodded, resolute. I didn't come here to run away from danger. I came to help. Besides, I owe it to those who've already been taken. He studied me for a moment, then gave a sharp nod. Very well, but we'll need supplies, weapons, and a plan. This won't be easy. Over the next few days, we prepared for our mission. We gathered food, water, and as many weapons as we could carry. The hunter showed me how to track the creature, how to move silently through the forest, and how to fight if cornered. Meanwhile, I pored over every book and scroll I could find, searching for any mention of the creature or its origins. I found nothing useful, but I did discover something else. A ritual, ancient and powerful, that might be able to banish the creature entirely. I kept this information to myself, not wanting to raise false hopes, but as we set out into the forest, armed with our weapons and determination, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was our last chance to save the villages and end the beast's terror once and for all. Days turned into nights, and our journey was fraught with peril. The forests seemed to grow darker and more oppressive as we ventured deeper, and the beasts seemed to grow ever closer. One evening, as we made camp, I turned to the hunter, his eyes still lingering on the fire as he contemplated the events that had brought us here. "What do you think our chances are, really?" I asked, knowing full well the stakes involved. "We're risking our lives, after all." The hunter looked up at me, meeting my gaze evenly, a sense of determination in his steel-gray eyes. "Our chances are as good as they're going to get under the circumstances. We can only hope that my knowledge and your bravado will see us through this ordeal," he said, the corner of his mouth creeping up into a slight smile. I couldn't help but chuckle. With that sort of reassurance, I feel better already. We shared a brief, exhausted laugh before silence fell between us once again. I couldn't help but wonder what was going through the hunter's mind. I knew we were both aware of the very real danger that lay before us. With a deep breath, I pushed aside my doubts and focused on our plan. The hunter handed me a worn and crinkled parchment depicting an ancient symbol. It was the key to trapping the beast in the cavern. "This must be drawn in fresh blood at the entrance," the hunter explained as he pointed to the 4 crossing lines in the center. "It will summon the beast and hold it in place for as long as you can maintain its binding." "This must be drawn in fresh blood at the entrance by trusting it to the process, by attracting deeply from the minds of any who was present and limits speak." The hunter's gaze softened. "I can't guarantee it, but it's our best chance." We continued on the trail towards the mountain, knowing that time was running out. The stubborn creature had proven elusive so far, but I could feel its presence growing stronger, as if it sensed our coming. As we neared the base of the mountain, we stopped at a small clearing. The hunter removed a satchel from his backpack and rummaged through it, extracting several strange-looking, bulky objects wrapped in peculiar, glowing materials. "These are fire wires," the hunter explained as he handed me one of the strange objects. "We'll need them to light the way and set the trap." "Follow me," the hunter said, taking the lead as we began to ascend the treacherous slope of the mountain. The fire wires glowed brightly in his hands, casting a ghostly light on the jagged rocks beneath our feet. We climbed for hours, our progress slow but steady. The air grew colder, and the wind picked up, howling through the trees above us. I could feel the beast's presence looming nearby, an ever-present specter shadowing our every step.
Finally, we reached a narrow ledge that led to the entrance of the cavern.
The hunter gestured for me to be still while he stepped forward to survey the area. After a moment, he turned back to me and whispered, "The entrance is just ahead. Get ready to draw the symbol." My heart raced as I took the fire wire from the hunter and we crept towards the opening. The air grew thick with an eerie chill, and an unsettling feeling of dread washed over me. I couldn't shake the thought that this plan would backfire horribly. The creature was more powerful and intelligent than we had anticipated, and it had already eluded us time and time again. But I fought through my fear, focused on containing the creature in the cavern. This might be our only chance to save those innocent lives that I had grown close to. The hunter took one last look at the area, a steely determination in his eyes. "Remember," he said quietly, "we need to goad it towards the cave entrance." Chapter 11. The forest grew darker and more ominous as we ventured deeper. The usual sounds of wildlife were absent, replaced by an eerie silence that seemed to press in on us from all sides. I could feel the creature's presence, like a malevolent force pushing against my mind. Suddenly, the hunter held up a hand, signaling for me to stop. He pointed ahead where a large, twisted tree stood sentinel over the path. Carved into its trunk was a symbol, a circle with 3 wavy lines radiating outwards. "What is it?" I whispered. "The creature's mark," he replied grimly. "We're close now. Very close."
We moved forward cautiously, our senses heightened. The air grew colder, heavier, and I could taste the metallic tang of blood on my tongue. Then, without warning, the creature appeared.
It was massive, easily twice the size of a bear, with thick, matted fur and eyes that burned like embers. Its jaws were filled with row upon row of razor-sharp teeth, stained red with blood. As it roared, the very earth trembled beneath our feet.
I felt my heart pounding wildly in my chest, but I steeled myself. We had come too far to back down now.
"Stay behind me," the hunter commanded, drawing his weapon. I nodded, gripping my own tightly as I stepped back, watching him intently. The hunter lunged forward, swinging his weapon in a wide arc aimed at the creature's legs, trying to bring it crashing down, but the creature was nimble, dodging the attack with ease and swiping back with its massive claws. I felt my breath catch as I saw the damage those talons could inflict. With a snarl, the hunter dove to the side, narrowly avoiding disembowelment. He glared up at the creature, chest heaving, as he tried to catch his breath.
"Stay back!" he shouted over his shoulder to me. "I've got this."
"Like hell you do," I muttered, stepping up to flank the creature, while the hunter kept it distracted. Together, we could wear it down and eventually capture it. It was a gamble, but it was our only shot at saving the villagers and breaking the cycle of fear and bloodshed. As we continued, we discussed options for trapping the creature, constructing a cage, using magic, or even sealing it in a crypt. Each approach had its own set of challenges, but we agreed that the most critical element would be ensuring that we could immobilize it once we had it contained.
Despite the sleepless nights and constant vigilance, we gradually moved closer to our goal. Nightfall came, signaling the approach of the final offering.
I looked around at the gathered villagers, all of them cloaked in darkness and fear. As the hunter and I stood in the village center, I recalled the night's events, feeling the weight of responsibility on my shoulders. We had prepared for days, gathering our weapons, communicating silently with each other using a complex set of hand gestures and facial expressions that only we could decipher. The villagers watched as we moved into position, forming a protective barrier between the crowd and the looming creature. I marveled at the sight of them standing together, united by our common purpose. Fear glinted in every pair of eyes, but there was something else, too. Hope, and maybe even a little defiance.
As the creature advanced, I drew my weapon, an elaborate cage made of intricately woven metal, crafted specifically for this moment. Though it was still untested against such a formidable foe, I believed it could do what no other trap had managed before: capture the creature and keep it contained.
As the creature charged, I threw the trap at it, caught midair by the sheer force of its charge. It rammed into the cage, causing the air to whoosh out of my lungs. Instinctively, I yanked the lever, setting the mechanical trap into motion. With a series of well-placed hooks, the cage cinched around the creature's body, pinning its arms and legs to the ground. It roared, its heavy breaths fogging the air, as I hurriedly worked the makeshift prison shut.
With a final metallic click, the creature was secure, thrashing about with all its might, growling and snarling like a cornered animal, but unable to free itself.
As I stepped away from the cage, I felt a sense of relief wash over me. Too overwhelmed to celebrate victory just yet, it was short-lived.
Whispers began to spread through the crowd, fearless frowns giving way to guarded unease. There was a palpable shift in their behavior, a feeling of being trapped between a rock and a hard place.
Their eyes betrayed a mix of emotions, but the fear that had clung to them like a blade was slowly receding. The hunter turned to the crowd, addressing them for the first time. "People of this village, we have succeeded," he announced, his voice strong, yet tinged with sorrow. "The creature has been captured, and I assure you it will no longer pose a threat to us or our loved ones."
A murmur of disbelief erupted from the crowd, quickly subsiding as they begrudgingly accepted the weight of the news.
Chapter 12.
Exhausted and famished, I stumbled through the village, taking in the crude huts, the smoke curling out from the mud chimneys, and the churning sea down below. The chill in the air stung my cheeks and hands, but it wasn't the cold that made me shudder. It was the village and its people. So eerily silent, yet brimming with a ferocious intensity. The villagers watched me, their dark eyes following me like hungry wolves, unblinking.
Their anxiety was palpable. I could feel it coiling in the air around me, as thick as the mist that clung to the village. I walked slowly, giving them time to let my presence sink in. The hunter said he wanted them to know that I might be an outsider, but I was here to help. After what felt like an eternity, I found myself standing in front of the elder Rurik. His hair was salt and white, but his eyes bore the weight of countless more winters. In front of him sat a round wooden table laden with food and drink. Rurik gestured for me to take a seat, but I felt uneasy accepting his hospitality beneath the judgmental stares of the villagers.
"Thank you, but I don't deserve this," I said, glancing around at the curious crowd. "I'm only here to help." A ripple of murmurs flowed through the gathered villagers like a wind rolling across a wheat field. Rurik leaned forward with a bone-weary smile.
"You don't understand, Thomas. You've already done more than you imagine."
"By capturing the creature, you've given us all a chance to live free of fear. This feast is a small token of our gratitude for the bravery you and the hunter have shown." Rurik's kind words left me speechless. I glanced nervously at the hunter, who was watching me with a bemused expression. "Eat, Thomas," he urged. "You've earned it." I hesitated for a moment longer, then took a seat next to the hunter. The food was simple but delicious, and the mugs of ale seemed to warm my very soul.
The conversation remained light, mostly stories about the hunter's past exploits and everyone's relief at the capture of the creature. But as the evening wore on, I could feel a change in the air. The villagers no longer saw me as an outsider to be mistrusted, but rather as an ally. As the feast drew to a close, Rurik stood up and raised his mug in my direction, his face etched with gratitude. "Thomas, thank you. Thanks to your bravery and cunning, we can start anew. This place is no longer the den of darkness it once was. But with the creature caged, questions have arisen that such a simple capture was not able to answer."
The villagers are restless, their curiosity fueling whispers about the origins of the creature and the depths of its power. For the hunter, the questions are like a vault gently cracking open, revealing the secrets he spent his entire life trying to keep hidden. One morning, as dawn broke over the hazy horizon, I found the hunter pacing outside his hut, lost in thought.
Chapter 13.
The fire crackled and spit in the village square, casting flickering shadows on the assembled faces of the villagers. They watched Thomas intently as he began to speak, his voice steady and confident.
"Friends," he said, looking around at their wary faces, "you don't have to live like this anymore. You don't have to be afraid of the creature in the forest or the hunger that gnaws at your bellies. I promise to help you find another way to survive, a way that doesn't involve feeding innocent lives to the beast. And as for your belief that the creature cannot be killed, allow me to prove you wrong."
With a determined look, Thomas took a deep breath and rose from his seat, the cold air biting at his skin. The villagers exchanged uneasy glances, their gaze shifting between the stranger and their leader. But then, suddenly, the hunter stood as well, a smile spreading across his face.
"Taste a new way," the hunter called, raising his mug high.
The villagers stared at us in bewilderment and suspicion, but a few hesitant cheers echoed through the dark village streets.
I turned to the hunter, searching for a sign of his plan.
"We'll lure it out during the next full moon," he said quietly, so only I could hear. "It's the only time its strength is diminished." I nodded, my heart thumping with anticipation and fear. "And we'll need help," I added. "With our combined knowledge and skills, we can come up with a plan that will guarantee its defeat once and for all." The hunter looked thoughtful, considering my words before replying. "We'll capture the creature after the final offering during the next moon cycle and prepare a trap using what we've learned about its weaknesses." I felt a surge of optimism, imagining the possibility of saving these people, and perhaps my own salvation too. "But we must act quickly," I said.
"Every moment we waste puts the villagers in more danger. We need to learn its weaknesses, gather enough food, and rally our allies." The hunter nodded in grave agreement. "We can only hope to outwit it while minimizing our losses. I know the forest well, but this creature is a force unlike any other."
We huddled around the fire, planning until the early hours of the morning. I was grateful for the hunter's knowledge and bravery. We charted out a plan that would rely on subtlety, stealth, and guile.
The hunter cautiously approached the elder Rurik to explain our strategy. After careful consideration, Rurik nodded in agreement. "I trust your judgment, hunter," the elder said. "The safety of our people hangs in the balance. Whatever it takes to end this scourge, we will do." I could see a heavy burden in the eyes of the villagers as they listened to our discussions. Each of them had lost so much to the creature, and now they stood at a crossroads, deciding whether or not to put their faith in strangers like me and the hunter.
We decided on the course of action.
A few days before the next full moon, we would lure the beast to the cavern with a sacrifice from the village, since the creature could not resist fresh, hot blood. This ritual proved critical in keeping it at bay, but during the full moon night, its strength would be weakened enough for us to deal the final blow. The hunter and I spent our time scouring the cavern, seeking out the best location for an ambush. Chapter 14.
We stumbled back, barely avoiding the creature's snapping jaws. My heart pounded in my chest, fear threatening to overwhelm me. But I pushed it aside, focusing on the task at hand.
We need to separate it from its heart, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Can you distract it?
The hunter nodded, drawing his bow and nocking an arrow. Be careful, he warned before stepping forward, loosing arrows at the beast in quick succession.
I slipped away, circling around the creature while it was focused on the hunter. Its heart, I remembered from my research, was located in its chest, protected by a layer of dense muscle. Getting to it would be difficult, dangerous, but I had no choice.
As I approached, I saw that the creature's skin was covered in a slimy, viscous substance. Poison, most likely. I'd have to be careful not to touch it. Taking a deep breath, I readied my knife and lunged forward. The creature roared, its talons swiping through the air as it tried to shake off the hunter's arrows.
I plunged my knife into the slimy flesh and began to cut away at the surrounding muscle. The creature thrashed wildly, making it difficult for me to maintain my grip. I could feel its poison seeping into the wound on my arm, but I gritted my teeth and pressed on. With one final thrust, I reached the pulsing heart, gripping it tightly in my aching hand.
As the creature's roars subsided and its struggles weakened, I felt a surge of relief. The job was almost done. But I couldn't rest just yet. The most dangerous part of the encounter still loomed before me. Extracting the heart from the creature and ensuring that it would never rise again.
From the corner of my eye, I saw the hunter plunge his sword into the creature's head, severing its glowing red eyes and silencing its crippling bellows. With a final weak gasp, the beast wilted. Its sprawling limbs fell lifeless and still. It was over.
I took a deep breath, steadying myself as I clutched the throbbing heart in my hand. The poison burned through my veins, but I refused to let it get the better of me. I cautiously backed away from the creature, dropping the heart once I reached a safe distance. The hunter approached, eyeing the motionless creature and its discarded heart warily. Careful now, Thomas. It could still be concealing some form of dangerous residual energy.
I nodded, reluctantly taking a step back as the hunter cautiously approached the heart. His brow furrowed as he studied it, occasionally reaching out to poke or prod its quivering mass.
Finally, with a determined expression on his face, the hunter drew his sword and plunged it deep into the heart. The organ let out a final, anguished twist as it stopped moving altogether.
We both shared a moment of relief, grateful that the danger had finally passed. The village was now safe from the creature's relentless attacks.
The hunter turned to me, eyes gleaming with respect. You did it, Thomas. We did it. We've saved the village, and put an end to this dreadful nightmare.
My heart swelled with accomplishment, but there was little time to bask in our victory. We were both injured and in need of medical attention. I looked down at my poisoned arm, suddenly nauseous.
Chapter 15.
My blade sank deep into the creature's flesh and it let out a deafening roar, twisting around to face me. Its eyes blazed with fury, and I knew I had its full attention now. Good. That meant the hunter could focus on his part of the plan. I dodged its snapping jaws, dancing back and forth, trying to stay out of range while still keeping its focus on me. Every movement was a struggle. The poison on its skin made my hands slippery, and the stench of decay was almost overwhelming.
Then, suddenly, the hunter's voice rang out. Now!
I glanced over to see him standing atop a fallen log, a flaming arrow nocked to his bow. He released it, and it arced through the air, striking the creature square in the chest. The flame caught instantly, spreading rapidly across its body.
The creature thrashed and screamed, writhing in agony. I seized my chance, darting in close and driving my knife deep into its chest, feeling for the telltale beat of its heart.
With a final panting roar, the beast slumped to the ground, dead at last. The villagers, having witnessed the battle from a safe distance, erupted into cheers. The hunter sighed, relief washing over his lean, weary features. He regarded the fallen creature with a mix of grief and satisfaction. "It's over," he said somberly. "Finally."
I smiled grimly, looking around the wreckage of destroyed homes and lives. The relief was temporary, but for now, we had won a small victory.
The burly villager named Eric stepped forward, his voice thick with emotion and gratitude. "Thank you, traveler. You've risked your life for a people who barely know you. I don't know how we can ever repay you." I waved off his thanks. I just wanted to leave this dark place behind me. It's what anyone would have done in my situation. Just make sure to honor the beast by treating its flesh with respect.
The men of the village have hunted and killed their fair share of creatures in order to survive, Eric began. But there's always been one exception, one rule that we've held true for as long as I can remember. We haven't been able to kill the creature that's haunted us for so long. And while hunting to eat is necessary for our survival, I don't believe any of us have truly wanted, deep down, to harm the creature that's plagued our lives for so long. We chose instead to perpetuate the myth of its immortality in order to cope with the horrors it would inflict upon us.
As Eric spoke, I saw tears welling up in the eyes of some of the villagers. They huddled together for warmth and comfort, finally able to admit to themselves how deeply they had been traumatized.
But now we have a chance to start over, Eric continued. Our lives don't have to be ruled by fear any longer. We can finally lay the creature to rest and rebuild our village as a peaceful, thriving community. The crowd murmured in agreement, their faces reflecting a mixture of wonder and trepidation. The end of an era had arrived, and it was clear that many were unsure what the dawn of a new one would bring. The hunter and I met eyes, and I could see that he shared in my relief. A weight had been lifted from our shoulders. The beast could no longer terrorize innocent lives and hold this community captive to its will.
The fire crackled and spit in the village square as I watched the villagers, their dark eyes reflecting the dancing flames. Tension in their features had lessened, but apprehension lingered as they awaited a path forward. Eric turned to me, his voice softer now that he wanted the villagers to hear him. "Stranger, we know not where you've come from or where you're going, but you've given us more than just a chance at a better life. You've shown us kindness and compassion, and in return, we'd like to offer you something too. You see, there is a legend amongst our people about a magical stone that belongs to my family."
It's a myth, I thought to myself. A magical stone with healing properties that could revive even the lifeless? I stifled a chuckle, but the serious look on Eric's face made me reconsider.
"What kind of stone?" I asked instead. "It's called the hot stone," Eric explained. "Our ancestors believed that it was imbued with the essence of a great being, and that the stone could heal sickness, mend broken bonds, and even bring back the dead."
"Surely you can't be serious," I said, unable to hide my incredulity. The idea of such a stone seemed as fantastical as the very creature we had just defeated.
Eric simply nodded. "It's difficult to believe, I know, but our family has been protecting and caring for it for generations. It's said that only the purest of heart can unlock its true power, and we've sworn to safeguard it until that person comes. We never expected the one who would find it would come from outside our village." "And where exactly is this stone now?" I asked, skepticism creeping into my voice. "We had hidden it in the forest, deep within the creature's territory, knowing it was the one place even its keen sense of smell wouldn't detect it," Eric replied.
I raised an eyebrow. "And why did you think I might be worthy of such a rare artifact?"
Eric hesitated, his expression growing serious. "Because, traveler, you've shown us that there is still goodness in this world, despite the darkness that surrounds us. You were willing to risk your life to save our people, and that kind of selflessness and courage hasn't been seen in these parts for a very long time. The hunter vouched for your character as well, and we trust his judgment. Besides, we have no other way of repaying you for what you've done. If you refuse, we will be forever indebted to you."
His words took me aback. I was surprised that this community trusted me enough to entrust me with such a precious artifact. I glanced at the hunter, who nodded imperceptibly, a knowing look in his eyes. Suddenly, there was a loud commotion in the village's entrance.
The villagers gathered around the gate, staring in awe as a hooded figure emerged onto the cobblestone path. It was a woman, tall and slender, with curly dark hair and piercing sea-green eyes. Her clothes were simple but well-made, and she carried a large pack on her back. The woman removed her hood, revealing a face of profound beauty, with high cheekbones and a strong jawline, framed by full, delicate features. Her name was Cora, and she introduced herself as a traveling healer and midwife. There was an air of confidence and wisdom about her that made me immediately trust her. Eric offered his hand in greeting, and she took it with a warm, firm grip.
After introducing myself, I couldn't help but notice that Eric glanced over at the hunter, silently asking for his approval. The hunter nodded, confirming that I had earned their respect. Cora looked around the burned-down village. She seemed saddened, but hopeful. "I sensed a powerful darkness dissipating as I approached," she said, her eyes half closed.
"It's as if the very air here has changed. What happened to this place?"
I opened my mouth to respond, but Eric spoke up first. "The creature! It's dead! You were right about it all," he exclaimed.
"What do you mean, stranger?" Cora asked, her expression curious. I hesitated for a moment before deciding to share the truth with her. This village has been tormented by a monstrous creature for as long as anyone can remember, I began. It would come out at night, killing and devouring anyone who ventured near the village.
We've never been able to identify what it is, and no weapon we've used has been able to stop it. Cora listened intently, her eyes wide with surprise. A creature of that nature is beyond the scope of my knowledge, she admitted. But I'm grateful to be spared from its vile grasp. I can only imagine what kind of ruin it had brought upon this place.
Well, the villagers weren't entirely helpless before, Eric chimed in. They managed to trap it within their territory, and in that confined space, I believe it was unable to fully display its terrible capabilities. We don't know what might have happened if it had roamed free.
Cora nodded solemnly before turning back to me. So, why is it that you've chosen to help these people, stranger?
What compels you to risk your life for strangers in a far-off place? Cora asked, her tone gentle but probing. I hesitated for a moment, not quite sure how to answer that question. The truth was, I didn't really know myself. All I knew was that this journey, this quest to uncover the secrets of this mysterious village, had started out as a lark, a whim, a way to escape the boredom and stagnation of my mundane life. But now, faced with the real horrors of this place, I realized there was more at stake than just my own personal curiosity. This wasn't just about me anymore. I was in a position to make a difference, to help these people who had been suffering for so long, and to set them on a new path towards peace and prosperity.
But still, something lingered in the back of my mind, an elusive whisper of a reason, a voice that called out to me from the depths of my subconscious, urging me forward.
If you like this story, and for more dark stories, please hit the like button and subscribe to my channel. See ya!